good. Not quite yet. There we go. All right. So happy Sabbath, everyone.
Happy Sabbath.
Welcome. Welcome to Truth on the Web Ministries and Church of God Woodstock Weekly Sabbath Sermon Series. This is part 3 in a series that we're covering on Love the Lord with all your mind, studying logical thinking, and this is on logical fallacies. So the homework, that review that we started last week and got interrupted because the internet had some issues here in Woodstock locally for a little while. Just because I don't want to cram too much at once, I'm not going to try to finish that out this week. So I will do that next week. We'll do the review of that homework assignment next week. And then there is a homework assignment, a new one at the end of this part 3 that we'll cover in a couple weeks. So I'll go over that when we get to that point. So, but part 3, logical fallacies. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on each one of these in review of previous parts. I know there's a lot of terms and stuff that are new to me too, and just trying to keep all this stuff in my brain. So Isaiah 1:18, come now and let us reason together, saith the Lord. Now, God is God, so he could just flat out say, you do this, 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 and this, and don't do this, 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 and this. But the vast majority of Scripture is essentially reasoning with us, giving us opportunity to have our hearts softened towards him and towards who he is and towards how we should respond to him as we receive his Spirit. So he reasons with us, and he gives logical arguments. Of course, God is the God of logic. He's a reasonable God. He's not the author of confusion. So this, for example, here, let us reason together. And this part in Isaiah, he's gone through some examples about, like, look, you know, how later on he talks about he built the hedge and everything. But in chapter 1, in the earlier verses, he talks about, look, I gave you all the stuff. What more could I have done you? But every time you strayed, I tried to chasten you to bring you back on the path, and you wouldn't hear it. And so you're to the point now that you're sore from the tip of the head to the soles of the feet. There's nowhere for me to chasten anymore. It's like you've put yourself to and yet still, he says, let's reason together. Come on, choose life here. Your sins are scarlet. I know that. I'm not surprised at this. Come, I'll wash you clean. Just come to me. Come to me. I do want to review a few terms very quickly. A couple of them from part 1. And again, this is just the basic idea of logic. A logical argument is that an argument is a coherent series of reasons, statements, or facts intended to support or establish a conclusion. And an argument contains propositions or the true or false statements that, when taken together, constitute an argument. There are 2 basic types of propositions. One are premises. They are true propositions that support the conclusion, and the conclusion is the truth that logically follows the premises. So pretty straightforward. And to be honest with you, before I started working on this series and studying it out, I had never necessarily thought about it in these straightforward terms, but it has helped me just kind of frame the way I think. So it's not some kind of magic bullet, but it has helped me frame the way I think at times. We also, in the other parts, covered the fact that just being logical doesn't mean that it doesn't have room for emotions and the way we live our lives, and that everything doesn't have to be very straightforward, bullet point. The way you discuss stuff has to be all bullet points, and that's not the case here. But ultimately, anything that in our life has any real value or any real import, we should have thought through it. We really should have thought through it. We shouldn't just emotionally, reactionarily have assumed this is the way, this is what I'm going to do, and this is important. And certainly that applies to things with the ways of God, but in other things too, on all things in life. So again, logic is, let's say just a couple of days ago, I had a little encounter with a waitress, and I don't want to get into too many details, but so she seemed fairly friendly. She was pretty busy. But the cook, a cook had walked out that day just a little bit before, and so a manager had to step up and work in the kitchen, and so she was like, boy, it's a mess back there. So she wasn't really complaining or even making fun of him. She was just, so she was saying there's a mess back there. So after we finished eating, I'm going to the restroom, and I was coming back, and I noticed a woman was standing there waiting to pick up an order that I saw come in probably 15 minutes before, and she was still standing there waiting. to pick up her order. And a few minutes later, the waitress comes and they take our plates, and she comes with a check and talking with her, and she mentions that well, yeah, the kitchen, they were going to give that woman the potato skins that were like really burnt bad. And the waitress is like, well, no, you can't give those to her. I mean, that's awful. No way. And the manager's like, no, just do it. And so the waitress kind of stood her ground, and apparently they made new potato skins and gave it to the woman. So a little bit later, in talking with her about spiritual matters, she was friendly, so I wasn't real confronted, but she was essentially had the idea that in her mind, she had it sorted out what worked for her. And she didn't want to get involved. Like if somebody else was talking about stuff, it's like, well, let them have their thing and I'm going to have my thing. I don't like to get into controversial stuff. I just like people to let them do their thing. So I saw the opportunity to try to illustrate to her the disparity in her thought. So kind of like what this little thing here says. And I didn't use this verse with her or nothing, but we see here, don't answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be unto him. So in other words, if somebody is being a fool, don't be a fool back to him. But answer a fool according to his folly so that he can see the error in his ways or her ways. And so I attempted to try to show the mirror to her that, okay, well, no, you do willingly get involved in contentious things. You just did it with the potato skins. You stuck your neck out because it was something that you thought was important, that mattered. And it did matter. And I complimented her. Like, hey, that's good that you did that. That was very nice that you did that for that lady. So the issue is that in her mind, she has created a scenario in regards to God and eternity and everything that it's not important. Potato skins are important. She should make a stand for potatoes. And I don't mean to mock her. I'm not just using it as an example. So, but this is an example of a gap in people's thinking. And I'm sure I still have those kind of gaps too in some stuff that I think. All of us do. If we think we don't, we're fooling ourselves. We should constantly take stock in what we believe, why we believe it, especially the things that are important. So this is just an example. And I think that this logic is part of it. And there's a little quote from Einstein here that I thought was good. So education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. And that really is true. So especially in today's electronic age, we have such access to facts. We can get all the facts we need. You want a scripture, you want a group of scriptures, boom, you can look them up in a second. You can just, so the facts, well, facts are important, and we should have a good quantity of facts within our head that we use on a daily basis to sort out how we live our lives. The facts themselves aren't the important thing if we don't know how to apply them or organize them or sort them out or make them important in our lives. And so the example that I just gave of the waitress, the facts that she had weren't properly prioritized. Potato skins were more important than her own eternal destination, essentially. And I just use her only as an example. A couple more terms I want to review from part 2. We talked about a couple different schools of thought in regards to logical application of facts. There's the School of Empiricism, which is a philosophy that knowledge is based solely on what can be confirmed with the senses. Often this is claimed by science, but if you spend much time talking with them, often they aren't really living by empirical evidence. They are living by what they would consider rationalism. So, and this is a philosophy that knowledge is based on valid reasoning without any requirement that it be directly confirmed with the senses. So you can't, like, for example, God's existence, you cannot directly test to determine the existence of God. There are many evidences that God exists, but it's not like, if you want to say, are there any bells in 511 Meadow Avenue? You can go around and look around. Yes, there are. So this is hard evidence. Yes, there are bells. It's hard evidence. You can empirically derive that fact. Whereas rationalism would be, well, maybe, the bell might be hidden and I might not be able to find it. So I couldn't definitively say, no, there is not a bell anywhere in this house unless I looked in every single nook and cranny of the house. And I could say, well, there used to be a bell there, so it's probably somewhere. The dog probably hid it. So, or one of the kids hid it. So rationalism. And then one of the other terms in trying to determine if a rational and an empirical argument is true is falsifiable. So if an empirical argument is true, it has to be falsifiable. It has to be proven false or be able to be proven false if it is indeed false. So a statement, hypothesis, or theory is falsifiable only if it can be contradicted by an observation. So the fact that there are no bells in the house could be easily contradicted if I saw a bell. Then I could say, well, yes, that's contradictable. So a couple other, one more term here, Enthamine. So we talked about this. These are logical arguments that aren't, again, formally laid out in bullet points. So they're expressions where part of the argument is intended or unstated because it's obvious. So an argument which is on the premises or conclusion is not explicitly stated. Usually this is because the unstated claim is obvious. And we gave some examples in part 2. I'll do a couple here real quick. So one here is the light is green, therefore go. Well, the missing premise there is you're supposed to go on a green light. So you would assume when you say to someone light's green, go, that they understand you're supposed to go on a green light. So that's a valid argument, even though it's technically not structured completely. It's completely a valid logical argument. If your audience understands the context, it's all good. Nothing wrong with that. An invalid argument or something that is wrong here is the same basis. Well, there's many religions, therefore Jesus is not the only way. And so we talked about these kind of statements. So if you hear a statement or if you think a statement like this, you'll want to pause and say, wait a minute. So there's something missing here. There's an unstated premise that will help pull the covers back on the error. So the unstated premise in this relatively simple example is that other religions also have a way to salvation. So that's not correct. Only Christianity has the way. So then once you understand the missing premise, then you can start to unravel and talk about where it's invalid and why that's not correct. So those were just a few examples there and a review of a few of the terms that we went over in parts 1 and 2. And so now we're going to go on to part 3 here, which is logical fallacies. So let's first just define what a fallacy is. So a fallacy is reasoning that is logically invalid or that undermines the logical validity of an argument. Because of their variety, there's many fallacies. Fallacies are challenging to classify. They can be classified by their structure, such as formal fallacies, or content, informal fallacies. And informal fallacies are the most common, and pretty much all the ones we're going to go over today are informal fallacies. But you don't really need to know that. They're just ways that we can mistakenly have gaps in our logic without realizing it. Or ways that people, ourselves or others, can intentionally peddle something that's not true by exploiting logical fallacies and making things look right when they're not right. Like the previous example, well, there's many religions, so Jesus can't be the only way. That makes there is a certain validity to that statement if you take it on its face value. But if you understand that, well, Jesus is the only way, then that argument will hit you sideways and be like, well, wait a minute. On the surface, that argument seems right, so there must be something that's not spoken there. So get to that point, and then you can start to tear it down. So the use of fallacies, intentional or otherwise, is common when the speaker's goal of achieving common agreement is more important to them than utilizing sound reasoning. So in other words, they want everybody to agree. You want your listeners to agree with what you're saying. Much more so than, well, I just actually want to say what's true, and hopefully it makes sense and I'm right. But if not, then I want my listeners to be able to correct me if I've made an error. When the fallacies are used, the premise should be recognized as not well-grounded, the conclusion as unproven, but not necessarily false. So it doesn't mean just because there's been a fallacy used in an argument that the conclusion actually is wrong. And we'll cover, that's actually a fallacy in itself, so we'll cover that too. And the argument is unsound. But if there are logical fallacies in our argument, at a minimum, the argument isn't necessarily the most sound argument, the most sound or proper way to present a truth. So we're just going to cover some examples here. Got about 20 of them or so. So the first one, this is a term you may have heard, red herring. So I spent a bunch of time, and it was actually edifying, of like looking into, well, so where do the names of all of these come from? And I had some of that in here, but I took it out because it would add like another hour, and it doesn't really bear any fruit. It was enjoyable for me to look into it, but so this one though actually is, so there's no such fish as a red herring. Yes, it's a red herring, exactly. Yes, so good example. So a red herring actually isn't really a fish, but it was I think the origin of this does help us to understand why this term is applied here. Is that it essentially was used, it was a smelly fish, and a lot of times it would be a herring, and they would put chemicals when they prepared it into it that gave it a reddish tint. But the purpose was that it was very pungent, and it was used in hunting to either distract dogs so that dogs wouldn't attack your rabbits, because the dogs then that would cover the smell. It also was used in cooking so that the stink of the fish would cover the bad food of the other smell of the other food. So essentially it would distract you from what's really going on. So it would distract it. So the dogs were there to hunt rabbits, but a rabbit owner would put the smelly fish up so the dogs would be distracted from the rabbit scent and be drawn to it. So it would distract them from the purpose. They were there for rabbits, but they got distracted by smelly fish. Same thing. So essentially that's how the term is applied. So red herring is attempting to redirect the argument to another issue to which the person doing the redirecting can better respond. The red herring is a deliberate diversion of attention with the intention of trying to abandon the original argument. So, Yep. So here I have an example. Mike asks Bob. So if there's any Mikes or Bobs or any, so there's names in some of these examples. I don't have anybody online. I think there's one example that has Amanda in it. So sorry, Mandy, it's not, but it's not you. So Mike asks Bob, since it is morally wrong to cheat on your spouse, why on earth would you have done that? Pretty straightforward question. Bob responds, but what is morality exactly? So he's trying to deflect from the question. Well, what is morality? So then Mike bites and he takes the bait. Mike answers, it's a code of conduct shared by cultures. Bob responds, but who creates this code? So now the original question, why did you cheat on your wife? Bob is gone. And then now they're having a debate about morality and where it comes from. And so this is just an example. So a red herring. So now whether Bob intentionally in his mind thought, okay, I want to get off of this topic, or just from his gut, respond. So we always have to pay attention to our reactions. And are we doing this, and why are we doing this? Oftentimes it's not intentional, it's unintentional, but it's because we aren't thinking logically, we're reacting from our emotions. And so as a result, this kind of stuff happens. Right. Right, yes, might be defensive, yeah, right. So we can assume Mike and Bob had a good rapport, and so Mike. So it's also known as like beside the point or misdirection, changing the subject, false emphasis, irrelevant conclusion, and so on ad infinitum. So there's, again, as in the definition said, there's different people have tried to classify different logical fallacies into categories, but there's a lot of overlap so it's difficult to do. But there's actually probably one fairly common red herring that people use, and there's like 4 different main types of them. And so we'll cover those now. So it's the ad hominem. So what that means essentially is you're attacking the person making the argument rather than the argument itself. When the attack on the person is completely irrelevant to the argument the person is making. So it's a type of red herring. You don't have, so in the previous example, Bob could say, well, yeah, but you're stupid. So that would be, so then completely change the subject. And then Mike would be, well, no, I'm not stupid. Why do you say that? So ad hominem attacks can take the form of overtly attacking somebody, or more subtly casting doubt on their character or personal attributes as a way to discredit their argument. The result of an ad hominem attack can be to undermine someone's case without actually having to engage with it. So ad hominem attacks, then you can completely change the subject without even addressing the subject. And so, yeah, politicians are great at doing it. You see all the commercials on TV, they're all ad hominem. So let's look at 4 basic or main types of ad hominems. So the first one here is known as abusive. So attacking your opponent's character or personal traits in an attempt to undermine their argument. So Tony wants us to believe that the origin of life was an accident. But Tony is a godless heathen who has spent more time in jail than in church. So the only information we should consider from him is the best way to make license plates. So that is an ad hominem attack that completely changes the topic. It might be true. It might be true, but nonetheless, it's an ad hominem attack that attacks their character or person. So that's one type. The other type is a circumstantial. They call it a circumstantial ad hominem circumstantial, suggesting that the person who is making the argument is biased or predisposed to take a particular stance, and therefore the argument is automatically invalid. And the example we have here is, of course, your minister says he believes in God. He would be unemployed otherwise. So that statement may be true of a minister that gets paid, which it's not unbiblical. So we don't get paid here, but nonetheless, there are ministers that biblically that's so. So that this statement may be true, but let me make sure I've got my slides here in the right order. But even if it is true that he may be biased towards saying, yes, I believe in God, does not undermine the argument itself. So this is saying because someone is biased towards a particular point of view, that means that their argument is invalid automatically. Well, of course, they want to. Make sense? And also, I would like, and I'm going to put this out online, is that as I'm going through, if you have some other examples that you think might apply to these, please either type them in there or here in the room. Please speak up. Oh, that might help clarify further. All right, and then we have ad hominem, and this is one of the goofy names, toquoque, or toquoque, which essentially means you too. Essentially means you too. So claiming the argument is false or flawed by pointing out that the one making the argument is not acting consistently with the claims of that argument. And the example here, and this is true, Jimmy Swaggart argued strongly against sexual immorality, yet while married, he had several affairs with prostitutes. Therefore, sexual immorality is acceptable. No, it's not. Was Jimmy Swaggart wrong in doing that? Was he a hypocrite in doing that? Yes. But does that change the fact that sexual immorality is a sin and God disapproves of it? No, it does not. So even though the attack, the ad hominem attack, is correct, it doesn't undermine the validity of the argument. Now, I would grant that if someone is going to preach against sexual immorality, they should probably have a modicum of purity in their own life before they do that. Because one, they're going to stand before their maker guilty of hypocrisy, which you don't want to do. And two, they will cause stumbling stones to be laid at the feet of those who might hear the words otherwise. However, on the final day of judgment, nobody's going to be able to stand before the judgment throne and say, well, I continued in sexual immorality because of what Jimmy Swaggart did. They're not going to be able to do that. We're going to be responsible for our own sin. So that's not a defense for Jimmy Swaggart in any case. But some take this too far and they say, well, the reason people aren't Christians is because Christians are a bunch of hypocrites. No. The reason people aren't Christians is because light has come into the world and men have loved darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. That's why many people aren't Christians, period. So one more example here of ad hominem, guilt by association. So when the source is viewed negatively because of its association with another person or group who is already viewed negatively. And today, the general public opinion of the heathens against Christianity is relatively negative. They think they're a bunch of hypocrites. All they want is a bunch of money. So sometimes you bear the burden of guilt by association being identified with Christians, but Jesus for that same guilt. So, right. Yes, yeah. So yeah, one of the examples Brian just gave is that the Pharisees accused Jesus of being tax collectors and his friends and sinners, and so that was a guilt by association attempt. So the example here is my opponent for office is headquartered on Main Street, right next door to the puppy haters of America. Is that the sort of person, a puppy hater, you want to vote for? Just because their headquarters are next to the puppy haters of America. Again, guilt by association. Yeah, that's kind of a silly example, but it explains what, usually they're more nuanced than that, but ultimately it comes down to that. It's like, so there actually is kind of a flip side to this. There's a pro homonym, which is instead of guilt by association, it's honor by association. And one of the most common ones that the pro homonyms that is used is called the Galileo Gambit. And essentially that goes that Galileo and other great scientists of their days were persecuted by the authorities because they thought that their beliefs were heretical or wrong. And so many people today find honor and joy in the fact that they are persecuted for whatever it is they believe or whatever they're talked about. Now, we know that Scripture says that the world hated him first, and it's going to hate us. It absolutely says that. We know that there will be that if you're a Christian, you will endure persecutions. If you're a true Christian, you will endure from time to time or from long periods of time, you will endure persecution. But that's not the same as what this is. This is essentially taking joy in the persecution, and that somehow if you're not being persecuted, then you need to go on and stir something up so you're getting persecuted. That is I used to have the idea many years ago, even before I was a Christian, back when I was just looking into stuff, and I had kind of the idea that if a book was still in print, it just didn't contain enough truth because it wouldn't be in print if it truly had enough truth in it. That was just a silly idea in my mind, but that's, so so Alcoholics Anonymous, like the first edition, they got rid of that. So they changed it. So see, that was in my mind. It's like, the Galileo Gambit kind of thing. It's like looking at. So these things can be very subtle, but they definitely all exist. Let's see here. So it says here, the gambit's flawed in that being ridiculed does not necessarily correlate with being right. And many people who have been ridiculed in history were, in fact, wrong. Carl Sagan, who was wrong on a great many things, by the way, but nonetheless, he said here, that people laughed at geniuses such as Columbus and the Wright brothers, but they also laughed at Bozo the Clown. So just being ridiculed or mocked or persecuted is not necessarily evidence that you're holding up the truth. So keep that in mind too. All right, let's take a look at another one of the main categories. Again, I'm not going to try to break these all down as far as, so there's some other ones that we'll cover that could be red herrings, and like I said, there's a lot of overlap. But another one that's common is a straw man. And this one here is misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack. So by exaggerating, misrepresenting, or just completely fabricating someone's argument, it's much easier to present your own position as being reasonable, but this kind of dishonesty serves to undermine honest, rational debate. And here's an example. So Paul, the Apostle Paul, and his cronies talk about God all the time, but they also say that we should do evil that good will come. Well, no, that was a mischaracterization. That's Romans chapter 3. Paul says, hey, some people are saying that we're going around just because grace abounds. When sin abounds, then grace abounds, which is absolutely true. Some were taking that and flipping it over and saying, see, Paul and his cronies, his guys are going around. They're saying, oh, man, if you want grace, then sin more. And the more you sin, the more grace there'll be. Right. That was a mischaracterization. That was a straw man. And then, of course, once someone accepts that premise, well, they're going around saying to sin more, then it's easy to knock down all of Paul's arguments. Well, that guy just says go sin. I'm not going to listen to him. So it was a straw man that was set up. Another example or another fallacy, personal incredulity. So here it's because something is difficult to understand, or you don't want to believe it even, you assume it's probably not true. So complex subjects such as biblical historicity and archaeology, for example, there's many things, require some amount of understanding before one can make an informed judgment about the subject at hand. So you can't, some things, some discussions require a lot of study and time to dig into the facts and what really is, to really be able to evaluate, okay, is this premise true? Is this premise true? Is this premise true? Is this premise true? And actually, Brian and I were just talking the other day, and a number of things that I hold as true, I have in time past spent time digging through what I believe to be the significant depth of fact search to be convinced that, yes, this conclusion is indeed true. And I don't necessarily recollect all the details that I went through at the time when I came to this conclusion anyway. But 10 years ago, it could have been 2 weeks ago, unfortunately. But nonetheless, so it doesn't mean that we always have to know every single little jot and tittle, every single little piece of factual minutia to be able to hold something as true. But this fallacy speaks to the fact that, well, that's just too complicated. And the example we have here, and this is a common idea, it's like the Bible's teachings can't possibly be true. I don't see how Jesus could have literally been God in human flesh, much less born of a virgin. Do you really expect me to believe all that? And you could add to that list a long list or whatever. I just had a discussion with a guy in the square a little bit ago, and this is where he wanted to take it. So he wanted to start focusing on, well, so what's it going to be like in eternity? And he started like, oh, is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? So he wanted to talk about all these things that he thought were important, but they were just distractions. So, but his idea was then, well, so that's like way beyond anything I can understand. So he was incredulous about it. So I'm just rejecting the whole God thing, because like I can't figure out what eternity is going to be like. So that's an example. So, and this is a type of straw man also. And there's a lot of overlap. So false cause, another fallacy. Presuming that a real or perceived relationship between things means that one is the cause of the other. Okay, so many people confuse correlation, things happening together or in sequence, for causation, that one thing actually causes the other to happen. Sometimes correlation is coincidental, or it may be attributable to a common cause. So both of them actually might have been caused by something else. So maybe the example will help. So here, pointing to a fancy chart, Roger shows how gas prices have been rising over the past few decades, whilst at the same time the number of public payphones have been decreasing. Thus, the more payphones, the lower gas prices will be. So both of those things are true. Over the last decades, gas prices have increased dramatically. And over the last decades, the number of public payphones, especially in the US, have decreased drastically. Those things both have happened at the same time. But there is no real correlation between the two things. So that's what this is talking about, a false cause. You're essentially saying gas prices are rising because we're getting rid of all the public phone booths. Again, I don't think anybody really did this. This is somewhat of an extreme example just to illustrate the point. Another variation of this is called the Texas Sharpshooter. And we kind of use that in our sermons sometimes, where it talks about you shoot the arrow and then you paint the target. So you decide already, well, this is what is true. And then you go cherry pick data clusters or whatever that match what you want, that reinforce what you've already decided is true, rather than searching out, well, what is really true. So we always have to watch out for ourselves that we're not, especially with biblical stuff. And now remember, these fallacies, these are things that occur in the way we think and the way we speak about things that we believe and why we believe them. So they are gaps in our logic. And always remember also that even if sometimes like when I first became a Christian, I hadn't even hardly read much of the Bible at all. I knew very little. So to say that I had studied everything out and I understood all the historicity of the resurrection, and I knew like the archaeological evidence that showed that Scripture was essentially the same as it has been for the millennia that it's existed. I didn't know any of that stuff, but I believed it. I believed it. So it's not to say that, but as I grew in faith and as I spent time talking with others about the things that I believed, they would bring that stuff up, and I'd be like, well, I don't really, I need to look into that. I mean, I believe it, but why do I believe it? I need to look into that. So so fallacies, just because we believe something, and the reason that we believe it either was a fallacious logical argument, or there's gaps in the reasons why we would believe it, does not automatically mean that what we believe is not true. It just would be very difficult to discuss why we believe such a thing with someone else. So while fallacies are not good in any case, they don't automatically make an argument or the conclusion of an argument wrong. So just keep that in mind. But fallacies should always be avoided. We should always watch for them, because typically once a fallacy is crept into a logical argument in our own mind, then that's where the world, the flesh, and the enemy begin to attack. And that's where it gets chipped away at. And then so that's what's happened with today's, it's like the fallacy, the Enthamine that, well, God is love. So certainly since homosexuals love each other, God must love homosexuals. That is an Enthamine. There are missing premises in there that uncover the flaws in that argument. But if we just assume that is true, then we're headed down the wrong road. So another fallacy, appeal to emotion. Attempting to manipulate an emotional response in place of a valid or compelling argument. It's important to note that sometimes a logically coherent argument may inspire emotion or have an emotional aspect. So that's not wrong in and of itself. So some things we get passionate about. So it's okay that there is emotion involved with logical arguments, where we have emotions. God gave them to us. They're good as long as they don't control us, as long as they're controlled by our heart or by our spirit, by His Spirit. But the problem and fallacy occurs when emotion is used instead of a logical argument, or to obscure the fact that no compelling rational reason exists for one position. Appeals to emotion are a very common and effective argument tactic, but they're ultimately flawed, dishonest, and tend to make one's opponents justifiably emotional. So the example I have here, actually I took this one from somewhere. So Luke didn't want to eat his sheep's brains with chopped liver and Brussels sprouts. I'm with you, Luke. But his father told him to think about the poor, starving children in the third world country that weren't fortunate enough to have any food at all. So that's not really an answer to the argument. That's an appeal to emotion. It's like, sure, you should feel horrible that you even thought that. You should be gobbling that nasty stuff up. Yeah. When the real response to that could be, that's your food you're eating tonight, eat it. Or go to bed hungry. So, nonetheless, appeal to emotion. Another one that's commonly used is appeal to authority. So here, using the opinion or position of an authority figure or institution of authority in place of an actual argument. So it's not always wrong. I mean, parents can say, well, because I said so. They're appealing to their authority's parents, and that's a valid argument. But it's important to note that this fallacy should not be used to dismiss the claims of experts or scientific consensus if it's correct. Appeals to authority are not valid arguments, but nor is it reasonable to disregard the claims of experts who have had a demonstrated depth of knowledge unless one has a similar level of understanding and or access to empirical evidence. So in other words, Just because someone's appealing to authority doesn't mean, some of us have that bent in us. It's like we're just anti-authoritarian. So if you tell me to do anything, or if you say somebody else said to do this, I'm going to be against it automatically. So this is saying don't automatically do that. It could be, again, it might not be the best way to argue the point, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. However, it is entirely possible that the opinion of a person or institution of authority is wrong. Therefore, the authority that such a person or institution holds does not have any intrinsic bearing upon whether their claims are true or not. With one example, God. So God is the authority, and what he says is always true. Here's an example. Not able to defend his position that abortion isn't murder, Javier said that in his state, murder was illegal and abortion is legal. Therefore, abortion isn't murder. He's appealing to the authority of the state to override the moral horribleness of abortion. So here in this case here, this is where the fallacy bears bad fruit. Yes, what he says is true. That's definitely true here in the state of Illinois that we live in. That murder in general, murder unless it's an unborn baby, is illegal, but abortion is legal. Therefore, people could draw the conclusion, so, hey, look, it's not against the law, so it's okay to do. Appeal to authority.
That's the law of non-contradiction in a fallacy.
Right, yeah. Another one is the fallacy. Presuming that because a claim has been poorly argued, and I kind of covered this already, or a fallacy has been made, that the claim itself must be wrong. It is entirely possible to make a claim that is false, yet argue with logical coherency for the claim, just like the example we just did before. So that was logically coherent. Hey, in this state, it is illegal to murder, yet it is legal to have an abortion. Thus, abortion is not murder. That is logically coherent, but it is wrong. And then so that would be an Enthamine. So you would have to unpack that and find out where the missing premise is. Otherwise, you could just say, no, you're stupid. I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off me and sticks on you. Those are not good logical arguments. Just as it is possible to make a claim that it is true and justify it with various fallacies and poor arguments. So even if somebody gives a horribly wrong, I did an example in part 1 or part 2 about, well, the sky is blue today and the dog has bad breath, so Ron hates pickles. All three of those statements might be true, but they have nothing. So the conclusion, Ron hates pickles, is a true conclusion, but the argument for it makes no sense. So the argument doesn't prove it. So, but even though the argument was a bad argument, the conclusion is correct. So it's the same thing here. So here's an example. Recognizing that Amanda had committed a fallacy in arguing that we should eat healthy food because a nutritionist said it was best, Elise said poo-poo, which is actually another kind of fallacy. We should therefore eat double cheeseburgers every day. So just because maybe she did, and actually what, if anybody knows, so what fallacy did Amanda fall victim to here? Recognizing that Amanda had committed a fallacy in arguing that we should eat healthy food because a nutritionist said it was best. What fallacy did she fall victim to?
Authority.
Okay. Anybody online too? Just see if that's so. Nobody online now, so nobody's at their keyboard. So yes, appeal to authority. So she was appealing to the authority of a nutritionist and saying, because this nutritionist says this, it must be true. Appeal to authority. But at least also made a logical fallacy, or fell victim to a logical fallacy, and she assumed, oh, well, because your argument was fallacious, so now it's completely, your conclusion is wrong. We probably shouldn't eat double cheeseburgers every day. Every other day maybe would be okay, but so I want to bring out a point here. I haven't had a lot of scripture in this part, but I do want to cover one thing. I mentioned it briefly a few slides ago, and I want to emphasize here again that ultimately So there were so Jesus, when Jesus was here especially, he preached, one of the biggest things that he preached against was hypocrisy. And especially towards those who were in the know, the religious leaders. They should have known better, and they did not. So hypocrisy. So hypocrisy certainly is wrong. It's a sin. And if you are a hypocrite, you will not receive eternal life. However, one of the claims, and it's a perfect example of the fallacy, is that many say, well, Christians are a bunch of hypocrites. And so as a result, their claim that Jesus is the only way, I reject. And it can be Buddha or it can be Muhammad or whatever. That's the fallacy. That's what's happened. So we have to, Jesus bore the burden of his heritage through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the horrible things that the nation of Israel and Jacob had done throughout the centuries that led up to the time when he came here. He bore all of that. When he showed up, he's like, hey, here's a Jew. Any of the Romans that saw me, he's just another one of those Jews, all that stuff. So guilt by association, and so the fallacy was applied to him. They assumed, well, because he's one of those, then what he says is not worth even listening to. Paul endured the same, and the other apostles, as they went into the world, endured the same thing. Some from the Gentiles that, saw how some of the Jews acted, and they're like, well, he's one of those. I'm not going to listen to what he has to say. And then from his own countrymen, because they heard that he was now of the way. He was one of those Christians, and he was going around and turning the world upside down, so they didn't want to listen. Nonetheless, just because somebody's a hypocrite does not mean that someone who hears truth through a hypocrite is not guilty for denying that truth. Yeah, as I said, there's nobody on that final day on judgment is going to be able to stand up and point their finger at anybody and say it was their fault because of this, it was their fault because of this, it was their fault because of this. So I'm going to go through Matthew 7, verses 1-5 real quick here, because I think many Christians are of the same thing. They use the fallacy here. So judge not that ye be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And with what measure you meet, it shall be measured to you again. And why do you behold the mote that is in your brother's eye, and don't consider the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how will you say to your brother, let me pull out the mote out of thine own eye, and behold, the beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. So this here, Jesus is clearly teaching against hypocrisy. He is not providing a loophole for those who encounter hypocrites to say, well, he was a hypocrite, so I like my little mote. And he's a hypocrite, so I can still keep my little mote around. And many Christians automatically, they see this, and so they think, oh, well, you ain't Mr. Perfect. You don't work on water. You don't walk on water yet, so I've seen those bumper stickers, Once you can walk on water, come talk to me. You can judge me, kind of thing, right? It's like, that's Christians, we should not be ashamed. Even if, like I said, Jesus himself, when he was here, he had all kinds of reasons why guilt by association and everything that he should be ashamed, and yet he didn't let it for a second stop him from just preaching the truth and letting the chips fall where they may. So don't fall into the fallacy and think somehow just because, or another one that the enemy loves to get in there is like, well, so who am I? I mean, I'm not like also perfect. How can I go talk with someone else? Well, first, it's not my perfection. I'm not the judge of people. I'm not. God is the judge. Even Jesus himself, when he came, he says, I come not to condemn the world, but that to save the world, for they're already condemned by their deeds. But he came to shed light into the world, that so whomsoever will could come to him and receive eternal life. Another fallacy, the slippery slope. So arguing that if we allow A to happen, then Z will eventually happen too. Therefore, A should not happen. And there are times when that is true. I mean, but usually it's, if you unpack the logical argument better, you can see that there's clear cause and effect. So like, for example, many years ago, decades ago, people were warning, look, the homosexual lobby is so vocal, and they have the ear of those who make the laws and those who tell us what our vision should be, that they're gonna, and it's gonna end up to be, pedophiles are gonna be okay, and everything's gonna be okay. That's what the slippery slope. So that is true. That's a real thing. So there are cases where this slippery slope does apply, but you need to make sure that your logical argument is sound and it's not just out of fear. So going on to read here, the problem with this reasoning is that it avoids engaging with the issue at hand and instead shifts attention to hypotheticals. Because no proof is presented to show that these hypotheticals will in fact occur, the fallacy has the form of an appeal to emotion fallacy by leveraging fear. In effect, the argument at hand is unfairly tainted by unsubstantiated conjecture. So it's somewhat of a red herring as well. So in the example I have here is Ron argued that if he allowed even one person to bring a pickle into his home, it would lead to everyone bringing pickles every time they visited. Slippery slope. Slippery slope. It's a fallacy. Another logical fallacy is known as special pleading. And all of these, they have different names. The name isn't important. It's not important that you can pick, oh, this is that, this is a tu quoque, and this is a special pleading, and this is appeal to authority. But what is important is that we understand the underlying principles of how these common gaps in logic can easily occur and crop up in our own thinking and in others' thinking. So special pleading here, moving the goalposts or making up an exception when your claim was shown to be false. Rather than appreciate the benefits of being able to change one's mind through better understanding, many will invent ways to cling to their old beliefs. One of the most common ways that people do this is to post-rationalize a reason. So in other words, they go paint the target after they shoot the arrow. So why what they thought to be true must remain to be true. It's usually very easy to find a reason to believe something that suits us, and it requires integrity and genuine honesty with oneself to examine one's own beliefs and motivations without falling into the trap of justifying our existing ways of seeing ourselves and the world around us. So this one here, I think, has special application to Christians, because I'm sure all of us have in time past had doctrines that we may have held very dear to ourselves, that we may have thought were integral to salvation, not just some side issue, but things that were very important that we are now even ashamed of, that we used to hold those ideas and used to try to force those down other people's throats. So this one, I think, is very important, and we should always be intellectually humble when we're confronted with something that seems to go against something that we believe. Now, there are things that we need to stand on, and that is the fact that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. Now, that statement, while it may give us confidence and hold us fast, may not have much creed with others. So it may not be a very convincing argument to those who don't believe the same thing, but that's okay. That's not the point. So there are things that are not up for debate, but we should always constantly pay attention to our thoughts and our decisions and the things that we believe are right, and especially when they intersect with how we live our daily lives, and if they intersect with how we're working with other people, then we should constantly be evaluating and making sure that we have logically and properly arrived at that conclusion. And it's not always easy. Sometimes, we held stuff dear for a long time, and somebody starts showing us, I'd be wrong there. Our reaction is, and not just in biblical stuff, but just period things. So an example here, When Joe's wife pointed out that not paying the bills in a timely fashion allowed money to accrue more interest in their account, didn't make sense since the late fees totaled more than the interest earned, he switched tactics, stating that big companies deserve to wait longer for their money. And so he justified in his mind paying bills late. Again, this is a silly example, but it illustrates that how we can, if we have something, that either we don't feel like paying the bills or whatever, or we use the money and spend it on bubble gum instead, and so we got to wait till next payday because we don't have it or whatever, then so just always watch ourselves. It's always important for these things, and also watch others. So my example with the waitress earlier this week is an example. I think it has some application, this special pleading. So it was in her mind, the little soft, comfy nest that she had developed in regards to spiritual things. It's like, well, I just sort of do my thing and it's all good, and you do your thing and it's all good. If that's confronted, she's going to react necessarily like, okay, well, no, maybe that's not why, but here's another reason why it's still what I believe is true. So I think, unfortunately, I'm fairly masterful at that myself. So it's something I always need to watch for. I think all of us need to watch for it. Another example of a fallacy is the loaded question. So asking a question that has presumptions built into it so that it can't be answered without appearing guilty. And so these also can be these typically are enthymemes. They're missing premises. Loaded question fallacies are particularly effective at derailing rational debates because of their inflammatory nature. The recipient of the loaded question is compelled to defend themselves and may appear flustered or on the back foot. So in other words, it puts them back. It's like, oh, wow, I don't know how to answer that. So one I've heard before, it's like, oh, did you stop beating your wife yet? So again, the assumption is there's a yes or no answer. So the stepping back from that to realize there's an unspoken premise in there is that, do you beat your wife, or did you beat your wife? If so, have you stopped? So then you can answer it properly. So that's just another example. But here's the example. Grace and Helen were both romantically interested in Jim. One day, with Jim sitting within earshot, Grace asked in an inquisitive tone whether Helen was still having trouble with her drug habit. So again, just try to weave that in there, the loaded question. So always watch for that. So if it seems like, and we're going to get to the black and white because in a little bit later, the bifurcation, black or white, that's kind of related to this. But if you get confronted with an argument either in your own thinking where it seems like, wow, well, there doesn't seem like a good answer there, take a step back, try to unpack what's really being said there and figure out where the flaw is. Another one, we talked about this in the previous part and actually used this similar example too. But so the burden of proof, believing that the burden of proof lies not with the person making the claim, but with someone else to disprove. So if someone makes a claim, the burden of proof is on them to prove their claim is true. So the burden of proof lies with someone who is making a claim and is not upon anyone else to disprove. The inability or disinclination to disprove a claim does not render the claim valid, nor give it any credence whatsoever. However, it is important to note that we can never be certain of anything. I actually copied this paragraph, so there are a few things we can be certain of. But in general, it's important to know we should be humble. So we must assign value to any claim based on the available evidence, and to dismiss something on the basis that it hasn't been proven beyond all doubt is also fallacious reasoning. So just because there isn't entire, complete empirical evidence for something for us to dismiss it, that's a fallacy as well. So the burden of proof, again, guilty or innocent until proven guilty. The assumption is innocent. So the person, the prosecutor that is making the claim, this person is guilty, the burden is on them to prove they are guilty. It is not on the person that's being accused to prove they are innocent. And the only reason that trials have prosecution and defense sides is because ideally the prosecution would make claims that the defense can then refute. But the defense's job is not to prove they are innocent. That's already assumed in our court system. It's supposed to be. The prosecutor is supposed to prove guilt, and the defense has the opportunity to refute claims of guilt that the prosecution makes.
Like when someone says the Bible's full of contradictions, the burden of proof is on them to give you
Right.
examples.
Yeah, Brian gives an example there. People might say, well, the Bible's full of contradictions. So,
We should say, please
right.
don't clarify.
Yes. So then the burden of proof would be on them. So please give me an example of what it would be. Right. So the example here that there's a Bertrand Russell declares that a teapot is at this very moment in orbit around the sun between the Earth and Mars, and that because no one can prove him wrong, his claim is therefore a valid one. And again, he did this intentionally to prove, no, the burden of proof is on the person that makes a claim. So we went back to examples from part 1 where we talked about someone stepping in front of a train that if the train's moving fast enough, they will die. So ultimately, that has not been tested on every single person and every single train. So in theory, there could be some trains or some people that wouldn't die in that scenario, but that is very unlikely. And anybody who would make that claim, well, I think there are some people that could step in front of a train that's moving 100 miles an hour and not die, the burden of proof would be on them, because that is a ludicrous statement. Just like the teapot between the Earth and Mars. I think it's a coffee pot, but nonetheless. So the burden of proof lies on the person. So always remember that. Don't let people get you pinned back. But also remember that when you make claims, if you make claims, the burden of proof is on you to illustrate why you believe that is a reasonable claim you have made. And how would you do that? With a logical argument. Another example of a logical fallacy is ambiguity. So using a double meaning or ambiguity of language to mislead or misrepresent the truth. Politicians are often guilty of using ambiguity to mislead and will later point to how they were technically not outright lying if they come under scrutiny. Like, well, it depends on what the definition of is, for those that are old enough to remember that. So this one here is, so the example, when the judge asked the defendant why he hadn't paid his parking fines, he said that he shouldn't have to pay them because the sign said, fine for parking here. Here's the sign, fine for parking here. Well, he didn't park here. He says, so naturally he presumed that it would be fine to park there because he parked on the street. He didn't park where the sign was. He parked on the street. So again, that he tried to insert ambiguity into the meaning of the sign. And thus he said, well, so I didn't park where that sign was. I parked on the street. So, right. So that's an example of ambiguity. So again, there could be many examples. Another, so this is actually, many of you may have seen this before, but every time I happened to run across this week when I was doing research for the sermon. And so here's just another example I thought of ambiguity or misrepresentation of something. So it goes here, transported to a surreal landscape, a young girl kills the first person she meets and then teams up with 3 strangers to kill again. Well, that apparently was a little synopsis of The Wizard of Oz that appeared in a TV, program, upcoming thing. So that technically is true. That's right. The first person she landed the house on the witch, the first one she met, she killed. And then she teamed up with the scarecrow and the lion and the Tin Man and went and killed another witch. So, I mean, it technically is true, but it is somewhat of a gross misrepresentation of what the movie is about. So reading that, it's like, wow, what is that? And it's like, yeah, right. All right. Well, no, she saw in a tornado. It was the woman, wasn't it? But anyway, so we debate the the logical from a certain point of view. Yes. So again, this is just an example. I thought it's just a good example of how things can be mischaracterized. It's not technically wrong, but it certainly completely mischaracterizes what the movie's about. So. Yes, they do it with headlines all the time. So there were, Yeah, so we haven't done begging the question. Actually, is the last one we're going to cover. So the news, I'll try to remember to cover an example I read that I didn't include here. So so the next one, the logical fallacy that we're going to cover here is the bandwagon. So here, appealing to popularity or the fact that many people do something as an attempted form of validation. So the flaw in this argument is that the popularity of an idea has absolutely no bearing on its validity. It just doesn't. Now, I will say that if jumping in front of very fast-moving trains was very popular, the fact that everybody that did that died might give you pause before you do it. But literally, it was true for the most part when I was a kid. If my mom asked me, well, would you jump off a cliff if your friends did? I probably would have. So an example here. Here you go, Timmy. Seamus pointed a drunken finger at Sean and asked him to explain how so many people could believe in leprechauns if they were only a silly old superstition. So surely they must be real because a bunch of people believe in leprechauns. They got to be real. Why would all these people believe in leprechauns? An example of bandwagon. Kind of a silly example. So more probably closer to home. Many people today in the Christian arena jump on the bandwagon. Most people in America here that would identify themselves as some form of Christian are on the bandwagon of, well, yeah, but people can do whatever they want to do. My faith is good for me, but I'm not trying to force it on you. And so, because so many other people have that idea, that bandwagon, it helps reinforce it. People take confidence in the fact that, well, there's a whole bunch of other people that are doing it. And one of the main tactics that is used, like, for example, by the homosexual lobby, is the fact there are very few people that actually, most people, if you talk to, like in public, they're just like, whatever. They don't even, but because they're so loud, it sounds like there's a whole big mass of people that think this and want to be this. It's like people that actually want to change their pronouns. It's like hardly anybody, but they're very loud and vocal, and they have the ear of the media. And so it sounds like there's a whole bunch of people that are like that. Sounds like they're everywhere, right? Yes. And so then people adopt it. So then more people jump on the bandwagon, and then they're oh, no, I've got. So, yes. Yep. Yep. So the fallacy of composition or division. So assuming that one part of something has to be applied to all or other parts of it, or that the whole must apply to its parts. The examples, I think, will help clarify this. So often when something is true for one part, it does also apply to the whole or vice versa. But the crucial difference is whether there exists good evidence to show that this is the case. Because we observe consistencies in things, our thinking can become biased so that we presume consistency to exist where it does not. So these examples, I think, will clarify a little bit. So if someone stands up in their seat at a cricket match, obviously I copied this example from somewhere. I've never been to a cricket match. They can see better. And why can they see better? Because their head's up above everybody else is sitting down, so they can see better. Therefore, if everyone stands up, they can all see better. Well, no, then that's not true, because then everybody's standing up, so then they can't see better. So that is a, so it seems like, so they're associating, it's like, okay, standing up means you can see better. But no, that's not true. But the assumption is, well, if everybody stands up, everybody can see better. Or the second example, if a runner runs faster, he can win the race. Therefore, if all the runners run faster, they can all win the race. Well, no. So again, just because it applies to one thing, it doesn't mean it applies to everything. You can't extend that, right? Since every part of a certain machine is light in weight, the machine as a whole is light in weight. Again, that's not true. Obviously not. If you have, 1,000 pieces that only weigh a pound each, they're all light, but the piece together is 1,000. That's not light. So again, so you can't, so composition, so you can't automatically assume that an attribute or something that applies to one thing can be expanded to everything. Another example might be in the biblical realm, that everywhere you see trumpet mentioned, it's talking about the return of the Lord. There are some times when it's talking about that, but not everywhere that you see trumpet mentioned is it in relation to the return of the Lord. For example, any other examples of that? So it's just another fallacy. We always have to be careful. Right. Yes. Since we print our money, they just got to print more so we can cover our debt. Just print a few $1 trillion bills and send them off, and it'll be all good. This one's kind of funny. So there were a few of them that I don't have in here. If by whiskey, and there's but this one here, no true Scotsman. So here, this is making what could be called an appeal to purity. This is also known as appeal to purity is another. So as a way to dismiss relevant criticism or flaws of your argument. In this form of faulty reasoning, one's belief is rendered unfalsifiable because no matter how compelling the evidence is, one simply shifts the goalposts so that it wouldn't apply to a supposedly true or pure example. So this kind of post-rationalization is a way of avoiding valid criticisms of one's argument. And the example here, this is where it kind of comes from, no true Scotsman. So Angus declares that Scotsmen do not put sugar on their porridge, to which Lackland points out that he is a Scotsman and puts sugar on his porridge. Furious, like a true Scot, Angus yells that no true Scotsman sugars his porridge. So essentially Lackland he may be Scot by birth, but he's not a true, pure Scotsman. Why? Because he put sugar on his porridge. So that's why it's an unfalsifiable claim, because period. So it's appeal to plurality. Right. No true Chicagoan puts ketchup on their hot dog. Right. Yes. Well, you live in McHenry, so one I used to hold, I used to really believe this, is that for a short period, no true Christian would ever go to church every Sunday. That's the appeal. There are people that say they're Christians, but a true Christian is always going to attend convocation on the seventh-day Sabbath. Again, appeal to purity. So that's an example. We're getting close there. A couple more examples. So, bifurcation, or black or white, same thing. So presenting two alternative states as the only possibilities when in fact more possibilities exist. Also known as the false dilemma, this tactic has the appearance of forming a logical argument, but under closer scrutiny it becomes evident that there are more possibilities than the either-or choice that is presented. Binary black or white thinking doesn't allow for the many different variables, conditions, and contexts in which there would exist more than just two possibilities put forth. It frames the argument misleadingly and obscures rational, honest debate. A couple examples here. The light is either red or green. Well, no, the light could be yellow. So, another example, you either have faith or you are rational. That's a common thing people believe nowadays. It's like, them Christians are wacko. They believe in flat earth and, all that stuff. They're, now that doesn't mean that there aren't statements that there are just two options. I mean, there aren't. So, for example, Matthew 12:30, he that is not with me is against me. That's true. That's a true statement. There's no gray. There's no in between there. There's no third option. So just because there are only two options doesn't mean it's wrong, but oftentimes things get presented. The homework that was from a few weeks ago that we seem to not be able to get to review is an example of this. It essentially breaks it down to two options, and there are other possibilities. And we'll cover that next week. Another fallacy, anecdotal. So this is using personal experience or an isolated example instead of a sound argument or compelling evidence. It's often much easier for people to believe someone's testimony as opposed to understanding complex data and variation across a continuum. Quantitative scientific measures are almost always more accurate than personal perceptions and experiences. But our inclination, so for example, someone might ask, well, is it cold out today? And 5 people go out there and 3 of them say no and 2 say yes. So what does cold mean? So that's not that's anecdotal. That's, that's my experience. So a better way is to have a thermometer out there and you can see what the temperature is and they can decide for themselves if I'm going out with a coat or not. So, for example. But our inclination is to believe that which is tangible to us and or the word of someone we trust over a more abstract statistical reality. So the example here is, since Bob the drunk never got drunk one single time until after he started drinking. So in other words, if he never picked up a drink, he didn't get drunk. So he assumed the cause of his drunkenness was taking the first drink. That's anecdotal evidence. There's no evidence, there's no scientific empirical evidence to that whatsoever. It's anecdotal. Additionally, Bob also found others that had the same experience. So they hopped on the bandwagon and then they gave more emphasis to their anecdotal experience and they elevate it to the level of scientific or empirical fact. And there is no evidence of that, for example. Another one, middle ground. Saying that a compromise or middle point between 2 extremes must be the truth. Much of the time, the truth does indeed lie between 2 extreme points. So you got like the right wing wackos and the left wing wackos, and they're both way off. And the truth of God's way of living and acting and being governed does lie between those 2. But this can bias our thinking. Sometimes a thing is simply untrue, and a compromise of it is also untrue. Halfway between a truth and a lie is still a lie. So going back to the black or white, sometimes things are just black and white. There's just 2 things. So the example here, Holly said that Jesus was the only way to salvation, but her atheist coworker, Caleb, said that there was no God nor any need for salvation. Another coworker, Alice, offered a compromise, saying, there may or may not be a God. Who can know? So both points of view have some merit. So that sounds like, oh, that's a nice, compromise. Then you can get along and you can get along. But it's not true. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. There is a God and there is a need for salvation for all mankind. So in this case here, trying to take the middle ground because it's easier or for whatever reason is a fallacy. So the last one we're going to cover here, this actually is a kind of a big one, but I think this little bit here will cover it pretty good. So begging the question. So this actually in modern language is not used in this context as much. So it might be used more like the fact that, well, I had my mechanic work on my car. He fixed my brakes, but then 2 days later, my brakes failed. So it begs the question, is he a very good mechanic? So that's really not what this is. So that's kind of a modern way of using this phrase. But this begging the question actually is presenting a circular argument in which conclusion was included in the premise. So circular reasoning. This logically fallacious argument often arises in situations where people have an assumption that is very ingrained and therefore taken in their minds as a given. So here's some examples. Circular reasoning is bad, mostly because it's not very good. So do you see that? It's like, so that's a circular argument. It's like, okay, you're already assuming it's bad, so it's not very good. Chevys are the best cars because they aren't Fords. Again, that's the circular argument. And another one here, this is a circular argument. It doesn't mean just because it's a circular argument that it's false, but it is a circular argument. The Bible is true because it says it is. That is a circular. So we should, as Christians, we should realize that fact. Now, I have no problem believing that. I accept that in faith. I have spent much time over the years looking into the veracity of that statement and why would I believe that? I mean, if it truly, because someone could make the same statement about the Quran. The Quran says that it's the book. It's the book from God. So they could make the same circuit. So how could you just prove that just on that argument alone? You couldn't. There's no way you could have any real discussion or whatever. So I have just a little bit here. I actually got this little bit from Answers from Genesis, actually. It's a little thing they have here on this. So another example of circular reasoning relates to God's existence. Some Christians have argued that God exists because the Bible says God exists, which it does. And since God wrote the Bible, it must be true. God cannot tell a lie. This argument is problematic from a purely logical standpoint, since it bases belief in God's existence on the Christian belief that the Bible comes from God. So Christians can believe that. So oftentimes when I'll do sermons, I'll talk about, so this is for the Christian. This is a foundation we can stand upon. But using the Bible as an authority to someone who doesn't think the Bible is authority, that's a fallacious appeal to authority in their mind. It's not an argument that's going to hold any weight with them. And we don't need to use circular reasoning for these things as well. So the Bible does assume the existence of God, and it does claim to be the truth. Those statements must be taken on faith, which should surprise no one. The Bible says faith is required. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, and faith is the foundation of the Christian life, and that's absolutely true. So now I know so the discussion that I had earlier with the guy about eternity and what it was going to be like and everything, I told him, I says, well, my faith is not in understanding what it's going to be like, because I can't even imagine what eternity is going to be like. And to be honest with you, if it really is like streets of gold and stuff, that seems kind of gaudy to me. Now, I don't know, whatever God's got in plan, but my faith more is in him. He's got the plan. So my faith is in him. I don't need to know the details of that. But for someone who doesn't have that faith, that argument may not be very sound. So the Bible says faith is required without faith. So at the same time, there are many solid logical arguments to build a plausible case for the Christian belief. The existence of God can be deduced from the existence of creation and the veracity of the Bible through historical evidences. Circular reasoning is unnecessary. So there are ways that we can make the same statement, come to the same conclusion for someone that does not hold the Bible as authoritative without using circular reasoning. So just because it is a circular argument doesn't mean it's wrong, but we have to know our audience. So if we're talking to someone that doesn't hold this as an authority, then that argument is just a circular argument that has no value whatsoever. So we can use a combination of biblical data, logical reasoning, philosophy, and historical and scientific evidence to present the best possible case regarding the Christian teaching. So that was the last of the fallacies that I'm going to cover today. There are many more. Did I not? So there are many more. Next part, the next formal sermon will be next month, and it will be covering cognitive biases. So things that we hold in ourselves that might make us victim to using logical fallacies or bad arguments. So cognitive biases, they're known as. So I'll close out with this verse, and then I'll go over the homework. The assignment for next time, not the previous assignment. So Colossians 2, verses 6 through 9, we've covered this before. But so as we therefore have received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk you in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, as ye have been taught, abounding therein with thanksgiving. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy, vain conceit, logical fallacies, invalid arguments, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. So, the assignment. So select 3 fallacies. And I'd like to, again, we're all adults, so nobody's not, Brian said that we should not allow people to watch online if they don't submit assignments, but no, he didn't say that. But anyway, I would like to, again, as the Spirit leads, but I'd like to hear at least maybe a response from each household. But the homework is select 3 fallacies, either from the ones that are covered, that we covered today, or you can go online. There's a bunch of them. And for each of the three fallacies, find an example from your past where you have used them intentionally or not, and explain the circumstances. And preferably examples in the biblical realm. But if you have something else that's, in the business realm, that's fine. And so an example from me. So this is like so this would be an example from me. And so the fallacy would be ad hominem, guilt by association. So when I first started observing the Seventh-day Sabbath, so I was already a Christian. And there were a number of Christian preachers that I would listen to on the radio and stuff. And I was greatly edified by a lot. I mean, it directed me to the word and to prayer, to be filled with the Spirit. And I was built up by a lot of that stuff. But when I first started observing the Seventh-day Sabbath, I closed my ears. I cut myself off from all that stuff. And that was wrong. It was so guilt by association because they were Sunday keepers. So what am I going to do listen to them for? So that's an example of what I'm kind of looking for. So picking three fallacies and giving an example, something like that out of your own personal experience. So just start thinking, and maybe something that you got going on now that, it's like you realize, oh, wow, that was, I haven't been thinking correctly about that. So no, I'm not saying Chevys are the best cars. I actually drive a Toyota, by the way. So I saw that in there. So that's it, brothers and sisters. As always, it's a wonderful pleasure. Thanks for listening, and a prayer that this is all edifying to you and it helps you and me and everyone who hears it walk a closer walk with our Heavenly Father and His Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.